Okay, it is 5:30 Canadian time, so I will call the meeting to order. Bienvenue à tous. This meeting, colleagues, is called pursuant to the standing orders to deal with the international peer review of the Office of the Auditor General of Canada. And given the significance of the meeting, I just want to make a few opening comments. In conversations concerning the Office of the Auditor General, someone will invariably ask me the question, who audits the Auditor General? And this, of course, is a very important and an interesting question. As everyone in this committee realizes, the Office of the Auditor General has approximately 650 employees, an annual budget of approximately $90 million, and plays an extremely vital role in assisting Parliament to hold the government accountable for the economic and prudent expenditure of taxpayers' money. However, the office itself is accountable to Parliament for those funds it spends, which are allocated each year by Parliament, and that these funds, like all other funds allocated by Parliament, are spent in a manner that adheres to the basic principles of economy efficiency and that measures are in place to analyze effectiveness. Each and every year, the statements of the Office of the Auditor General are audited by the public accounting firm of Levesque Marchand, SENC, a mid-sized accounting firm located here in Ottawa. These statements are published annually on the website of the Office of the Auditor General and are in turn incorporated into the Public Accounts of Canada, which of course are tabled in Parliament in the fall of every year. In addition, and this gets us to tonight's meeting, every 5 years the operations of the Office of the Auditor General are subject to an international peer review to inquire, assess and report on the audit and assurance practices carried out by our national Office of the Auditor General. The objective of the peer review is to do a comprehensive inquiry and provide an independent assessment and opinion on whether the Office of the Auditor General management systems are suitably designed and operated effectively to provide reasonable assurances that the work of the Office of the Auditor General complies with relevant legislative authorities and professional standards. The international peer review was carried out by a team of professionals from the audit offices of Australia, Netherlands, Denmark, Sweden and Norway. The team leader was the Australian National Audit Office. The international peer review has been completed and was delivered to this committee in May or June of this year. The report is available on the website of the Office of the Auditor General. The report reveals a number of findings, observations, and makes 2 recommendations. Both the findings and the recommendations have been accepted by the Office of the Auditor General. Like other departments and agencies, the Public Accounts Committee asks that an action plan be filed with this committee proposing how that department or agency intends to deal with those recommendations which has been accepted. In June of this year, the Office of the Auditor General prepared its response or action plan, and that action plan has been filed with this committee. Again, the action plan is available on the website of the Office of the Auditor General. So over the next 2 hours, the Public Accounts Committee will hold a public hearing into both the peer review and the action plan. Appearing on behalf of the international peer review team via telephone conference is Mr. Ian McPhee, the Auditor General from Australia. Mr. McPhee will be accompanied by Brandon Jarrett, Executive Director of Professional Services Branch, again from the Australian National Audit Office, Deborah Jackson, Senior Director of Performance Audit Services Group, and Wayne Jones, Executive Director of Information Technology Audits. Again, both Ms. Jackson and Mr. Jones are from the Australian National Audit Office. Appearing on behalf of the Office of the Auditor General is, of course, Sheila Fraser, the Auditor General, and she's accompanied by John Wiersma, the Deputy Auditor General. And again, as I pointed out, Mr. McPhee, Mr. Jarrett, Ms. Jackson, and Mr. Jones are testifying from Australia video telephone conference. I understand it's 7:30 in the morning in Australia, and it is 5:30 here in Ottawa. So I want to wish our Australian witnesses a good morning, and I want to wish my Ottawa colleagues a good evening. So we're going to do this in the reverse order that we normally do it. We're going to hear from Mr. McPhee first, and then, of course, the committee will hear opening comments from Ms. Fraser. And I understand that Mr. McPhee and his colleagues will need to activate their microphones in order to be heard.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening. Can you hear us okay?
We can hear you.
Great. Well, I'm very pleased to appear today to discuss the international peer review of the Office of the Auditor General of Canada that was completed in May of this year. The review, as you have mentioned, was a joint effort with significant contributions from each of the respective audit offices of the Netherlands, Sweden, Norway and Denmark. And as you also indicated, joining me this morning are Mr. Brandon Jarrett, the Executive Director, Professional Services Branch in my office, Deb Jackson, Senior Director, Performance Audit, and Wayne Jones, the Executive Director in my IT Audit Branch. As you are aware, the objective of the review was to provide an independent opinion on whether the OAG's quality management system was suitably designed and operating effectively to provide reasonable assurance that the work of the OAG complied with relevant legislative authorities and professional standards. The peer review team found that for the period under review, the QMS for performance audit, special examination and annual audit was suitably designed to provide reasonable assurance that the work of the OAG complied with relevant legislative authorities and professional standards. Also, the QMS was operating effectively for the performance audit and special examination practices. For the annual audit practice, the QMS was generally operating effectively, but there were implementation issues in two areas. Firstly, the completeness of the risk assessment procedures informing the nature and extent of further audit procedures, and secondly, the sufficiency of audit documentation recording the results of the audit work performed. The peer review report included two recommendations that addressed these areas, which the OAG agreed to implement. The report also included suggestions for the OAG to consider and also acknowledges a range of good practices adopted by the OAG, which other audit offices internationally would benefit from. We are aware that the OAG has developed an action plan to implement the review team's recommendations and suggestions, and look forward to hearing about their progress with the implementation effort. In closing, I would like to recognise that peer reviews are a learning experience for both the review team and the office being reviewed. They facilitate the sharing of ideas and experiences among review team members. As members of the review team, we found the experience to be valuable and informative. And finally, I would like to thank Ms. Sheila Fraser for inviting my office to lead the peer review team and for the high level of cooperation and assistance provided to the team throughout the review. The OAG was exemplary in its attitude and approach to the review. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I and my colleagues would be more than happy to respond to any issues or questions that the committee may have.
Thank you very much, Mr. McPhee, for your opening statements. We are now going to turn the floor over to our Auditor General, Sheila Fraser. Ms. Fraser.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I am very pleased to be here today to discuss the results of the peer review that was recently completed by several of our international counterparts. As you mentioned, I am joined today by John Worsama, Deputy Auditor General, and my comments will be brief. I would like to start by thanking Ian McPhee, the Auditor General of Australia, and his staff for leading this review. J'aimerais aussi remercier les autres membres du comité.
I also want to thank the other members of the peer review team for their participation and contribution to this important project. They included representatives from the national audit offices of the Netherlands, Denmark, Sweden, and Norway. Mr. Chair, as you know, the peer review was undertaken at my request. The objective of the review was to provide an independent opinion on whether the quality management system used by the Office of the Auditor General to manage its audit practices was suitably designed and operating effectively. I believe that this type of external review is important. It provides independent assurance that you can rely on our work. It also leads to improvements in our practices and helps respond to a question often asked: who audits the Auditor General? Mr. Chair, I am pleased that the peer review report concluded positively with respect to the design of our quality management system and concluded that the system was operating effectively for the performance audit and special examination practices.
The report concluded that the quality management system was generally operating effectively, but it identified certain implementation issues that need attention and makes 2 recommendations aimed at addressing them. These issues concerned risk assessment and related audit work and the sufficiency of audit documentation recording the results of the audit work performed. These findings are similar to those of our own recent practice review. We have accepted the report's findings and agreed with the recommendations, and we have developed an action plan to implement the recommendations as well as the additional observations and suggestions for improvement included in the report. Our response and action plan, as was mentioned, were provided to the committee in June. We are also presenting an update on the current status of the action plan, and you will note that overall we are progressing according to plan. In closing, I would like to assure the committee that we are strongly committed to taking the necessary steps to ensure that you can continue to rely on our work. Mr. Chair, that concludes my statement, and we would be pleased to answer any questions that members may have. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Ms. Fraser. We're going to now go to questions from members, and we're going to start with the first round, and that'll be 7 minutes, and we're going to start with Mr. Dion. Mr. Dion, 7 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. J'espère vous avez...
Mr. Chair, I hope that you had a good summer, and I welcome everyone back. And yourself as well, Madam Auditor General. So my first question became quite friendly when I read the first sentence of the context. We often wonder who audits the Auditor General. And I thought I was going to hear about courses of Marxism and other bizarre things that we found on the first pages of Journal de Montréal this summer. First of all, how did it feel to be in our shoes? Where the errors in management give an impression of bad management overall in the media? Will that kind of change some of the headlines that came out over the past years in a government that you were a part of? And secondly, was the management of your office itself included in this review, or is it simply the quality of your work without looking at the management of the office? And third, if the management of the office was not included in this review, then who audits the management of your office? Thank you, Mr. Chair. First, regarding the first question about media coverage, I am sure, as are several officials and members here, we are not very happy to see ourselves in the headlines for actions that are perfectly justified, that were approved in advance in accordance with our politics, and that were presented so as to create an undue headline in the newspaper. And if the committee wants more explanations, I'll be pleased to explain. But this journalism was very dubious, without any foundation and no basis to it. But in our work environment, these things crop up once in a while, and we should just simply heave a great sigh and go on. The report of the review was above all about the quality of the management of products, but not management in itself. Some aspects were looked at. For example, how do we assign our personnel, how do we train the personnel, their hiring and recruiting and so on. Everything that has to do with the products and the quality of the products was covered. But when we were talking about hospitality fees or our contract systems and the costs, that was not covered by this peer review. What we're doing internal audits on a periodic basis, and we often use people contracted from the outside to look at our procedures of management. And those evaluations, yes, they're all on our website, and they're also mentioned on our report on performance. And I would be very pleased if the committee wishes, we could send you some excerpts and some summaries of these internal audits. I think that answers the question. This report refers a great deal to the procedure of risk evaluation, risk assessment. What is risk assessment? There are several aspects mentioned. One important aspect of it is that when you start a financial audit, you have to audit the potential risk that some error might crop up in the financial statements, and then we have to make sure that the error did not take place and that the risk was properly managed. And our colleagues, auditors, commented that the link between identification and evaluation of risks and the work we're doing should be more clearly identified. We can see the specific work for each risk, but we either have not got the linkage between the different aspects. There are also questions on information technology. Our policy did not require that specialists participate, specialists in information technology for auditing, but now after this review we have one. And for all the audits and all entities that have complex systems, we will bring in a specialist in IT to better evaluate the risk and also to better identify the possible improvements and funding proposals so that we can use them in our future audits. And third and last, there's the evaluation of the risk of fraud, which is quite recent in Canada. And the examiners noted that there's a great deal of variety in the application of the standard, what kind of conversation we can have with high officials or management boards and others. We have to state a clear policy about this regarding how people have to apply this new standard of auditing. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'm glad to be back here at your committee. Ms. Fraser, good afternoon. Mr. Wiersma, good afternoon. I read the documents that were given to us, at least the summaries of the evaluations, and one of the elements that I found was the issue of renewing auditing methods. And you said that you have hardly a year or two to get all this in shape, because we have a good system and we have to make it even better. But it has to be implemented and put on the rails. So how far have you gotten ahead with this renewal? The renewal was incited because Canada adopted international audit norms, standards, And there are quite a few practices that are changing, which will be enforced by the legislation beginning with December 31st this year. And everyone in audit must adopt these new standards. We published a temporary manual that states what the differences are so that people can begin to plan their auditing. And last year we concluded a strategic alliance with one of the big offices, and we expect to get all their material, their manuals, their training courses. We were hoping to have them by this summer, but unfortunately they were late, and that's how we had to come up with the temporary manual. And I hope that we'll have the other one near the end of this year or beginning next year. And we have to adjust it to our reality because there are differences between the public and the private sectors. And the courses are also going ahead. So the project is progressing well regarding financial audits, performance audits, and we also refer to a manual that covers all the policies and all the standards that affect the office as a whole, no matter what kind of auditing practice there is there. And all this is expected for 2011. We are expecting to meet all our deadlines, but the most important part was the financial audit, and we're ready for this change in December. Thus, we're in a transitional phase, and when there is such a transition, does it have an impact, for instance, on the number of personnel? Does it necessitate a review of the internal workings? We are passing through an uncertain period of time. We don't know how long these audits will need, because besides the changes in audit standards, we also have changes in accounting standards, and companies must change their accounting methods and the way that they account for certain transactions, which requires much training of our employees. And it was in anticipation of all that that we reduced, this is just one of the reasons among others, that we reduced the number of audits, of management audits that we do each year to free up the funds to be able to upgrade the manual and give the training. And we don't know exactly what impact it will have on auditing before having gone through with it. So what are you doing currently? Do you have models from elsewhere in the world, or is each country specific to its own management formula, to the extent that the budget allows for auditing in that country? It's pretty specific to each country, depending on standards that existed before. In Canada, we do not think that the differences are as great as they were in Europe, and we have a certain amount of experience because the auditing that we do for agencies of the United Nations have already used international standards. Obviously, we do a great deal of consultations with the big cabinets, which are also in a transitional stage. And we've learned a great deal from the experience in Europe, especially. And we're trying to evaluate this, but this evaluation must be done one entity at a time. depending on the kind of assets they have, the nature of their operations. And I think that we're privileged that we have access to all the training material. It would have been very difficult to do this work without that. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Chair and Madam Fraser. Welcome, and welcome to our guest from Australia. Thank you for the work that you've undertaken, ultimately on behalf of the people of Canada. We very much appreciate it. I'm sure you know the great respect that the Auditor General has in Canada, and well deserved. But my sense of that duty is that the part where we are to hold the auditor accountable in her own audit is valid, and woe be to anybody here who doesn't handle this properly, given that respect that Ms. Fraser has. But I do believe that they do see as part of the system, and why it works so well is that there is accountability. There's accountability for everyone, ultimately for us to directly to the Canadian people. So again, thank you so much for undertaking this work on behalf of our people. First question is in relation to the 04 peer review. And I also wanted to say, I just wanted to put on the record too, that the courage it takes, quite frankly, it needs to be noted by Canadians that our own Auditor General asked for this audit. And it's been my experience over 6 years on this committee that departments don't jump up and down in the federal government and say, pick me, pick me. So to have an auditor who's prepared to do just that and understand the potential damage, if you came out with a scathing report, the Auditor General's ability to continue to maintain that reputation and continue to do their work would be severely impaired. So I think it says a lot about the Auditor General. It says a lot about the confidence that she and her senior managers have in the department that they run, that they felt comfortable enough that whatever helpful criticisms might come forward would not in any way damage the respect, which really is the currency that the Auditor General has here. It's that respect. So, having said all of that, now we'll move to the actual report. I was interested that there was a reference to the 04 audit, and there were suggestions made there. And when I look at your response, Madam Fraser, on page 6 of your spreadsheets, in your action plan, it says, and I'm quoting, in addition, the 2004 peer review suggested that the presentation of reports could be improved through the use of graphics and tables to present complex numerical data and footnotes showing sources of evidence. We consider that this suggestion is still valid, end quote. So the obvious question is why do we have an outstanding recommendation that you agreed to in 04, still seem to agree to now, and I'm just wondering why in the last 6 years you didn't implement it.
Thank you, Chair. We have tried to implement it. We have tried whenever we have complex data. Our communications team works very hard to try to present it in a way that makes it clear and easy to understand to parliamentarians. I think what we're trying to say here is that we recognize that we can always do better. We will look to see, I mean, the issue is working really with the teams to try to get them as well to think about how best to implement this. And if we have, I mean, I would welcome suggestions from members of Parliament as well in reading our reports if there are ways to improve the presentation. Certainly when we have done surveys of members or on the content of the reports and the understandability of the reports, it's always been very favorable. So I think this is one of these things that's sort of ongoing. I doubt that it will ever be completely resolved. There was one suggestion made that you will note in the response where there was a suggestion made to use footnotes we have not agreed with that. We
Yeah,
think
so that was going to be one of my subsequent questions. And the rationale for that?
Well, we just think it would make the report very heavy if we started to source all of the evidence, where our evidence came from. We do indicate in the report the criteria, what the sources of the criteria, where do those come from. But if we were to start sourcing all of our evidence, I mean, we have binders full of evidence. So we thought that it would make the report actually very difficult and difficult to understand.
Thank you. Mr. McPhee, your thoughts on your recommendation and the response you've heard from our Auditor General on the issue of footnotes?
Thank you. Thank you, Vice Chair. I think it's a matter for the Auditor General at the end of the day. Certainly in Australia, we judiciously use footnotes to refer to key sources of evidence, particularly government documents or matters of that kind. And sometimes we use footnotes just to provide a little bit more background information rather than cluttering up the report, the main report itself. We use a footnote just to provide a little bit more context, sometimes a little bit more background information. But Sheila Fraser is right to say that undue use of that sort of approach does probably cloud the report. So it does have to be careful, and only in significant cases would we use that to help the reader, to provide more context for the reader.
Okay, thanks. That's very helpful. I don't want to belabor this one point on footnotes, but what is the practice in many of the other, say, Commonwealth countries? Because it sounds to me like it's a judgment call, and if it's a judgment call, then I'm just curious as to why you would reference it. If it's entirely up to the discretion of RAG, then why make the point? But obviously there's a reason why you've made the point. So perhaps you help me understand maybe what they're doing in other Commonwealth countries with regard to the use of the footnotes in reports.
I can respond to part of that question. I'll ask Deb Jackson to assist as well. I think it is a matter of discretion. When we did the review, we provided not only the recommendations, which were addressing what we considered to be the significant matters that the OAG needed to take into account, but we also made suggestions which are discretionary, but areas where we believe the OAG should consider approaches which may improve the presentation and communication effectiveness of their reports. And it's an approach we use in Australia, and where we come across issues which may not be, all that significant in the overall scheme of things, but nevertheless important to pass on to the agency that we're auditing. There's an area where they might look at whether they can improve a particular approach by taking on board something. And I need to say here that in Australia we've moved from our audit reports containing many recommendations to seriously reducing the number of recommendations so that we only focus on what we believe to be significant matters of public administration. And when you cull something like 30 recommendations in a report we may have produced 10 years ago to something like 5 or 6, it's not that necessarily that the quality of administration is improving, as many of my colleagues in agencies say, well, look, you've got 30 recommendations last year, now only 6, we've obviously improved. And I say, well, actually, no. What we're doing, we're trying to focus on the significant matters now. But we then say, but in the body of the report, we will nevertheless make suggestions which aren't all that significant, but nevertheless useful to improve administration or performance. So I guess we have taken that philosophy, that approach, across to the report that we've done with our colleague to just raise the issues of tables and footnotes. And in some other areas we've made what we call less significant suggestions for the OAG to consider. And the pleasing thing is the OAG, I think, except for the issue of footnotes, I think has agreed to take on what I call the minor suggestions. So That's fine, and we're happy. And the reason we didn't put it in a recommendation, we thought it was entirely appropriate for the OAG to make the decision whether they saw benefit in this approach. But in terms of the specific matter that you raised, I'll just ask my colleague Deb Jackson to see if she can add any further information about the international experience.
Okay, thank you, Mr. McVeigh. I suppose what I just wanted to say is this is actually a product of several of the audit officers, and there was 2 other audit officers that were involved in the performance audit part of it, and we all felt that the recommendation of the 2004 report, as we said here, is still valid. It was common practice, as Mr. McVeigh says, in Australia to use footnoting for sourcing evidence from, say, third parties or data from third parties or from the agency being reviewed. And it was also common practice in the other audit officers that were involved in this peer review. So that's why we felt it was a valid suggestion in this report. And I understand it is more widely also a common practice among audit officers.
Very much. It sure points to a great summary, a great report when we had to spend so much time on footnotes. So thank you very much. Appreciate that. Thank you, Chair.
Mr. Saxton, 7 minutes.
Chair, and thanks to our witnesses for being here today with us. A special thanks to Mr. McPhee and his team for waking up so early so that they could be with us via video conference. And Mr. McPhee, I can't help but notice the object of art that you have on your desk in front of you. It looks a lot like the work of the Haida First Nation from my home province of British Columbia. My first question is for Mr. McPhee. Have you or has your team ever done an international audit before?
Yes, if I might just answer that. The ANAO was actually involved in the peer review of the US GAO in 2007? And we also, and I'm sure Mr. Jarrett can probably talk about this a little bit more, but we also have an agreement with the New Zealand Audit Office where every second year we do a sort of, I suppose, a mini peer review of each other's offices.
Thank you. And can you tell us how this audit compares and contrasts to those audits that you've done?
I think this one has had a much wider focus. It's been much broader and more in depth, in the sense that, particularly with our colleagues in New Zealand, we may do a review of several of their performance audits, but we don't go into the full review of their quality management system for both performance and annual audits. So we do. This is the most significant review we've been involved in because we've led it and because of the breadth of the audit or the review objectives. And can I say, just thank you for recognising the work of art here. We just wanted to have a little bit of Canada here with us this morning, and I'm pleased you have noticed it. Thank you.
For having it. My next question is regarding the scope of the audit. How did you decide on the scope of this review?
It was actually a decision between, or a subject of discussion between the OAG and the ANAO. The OAG had specific areas that they wanted us to, or wanted the peer review team to examine, and they largely suggested what the objective and the scope would be. We then discussed that, and so some of the detail was subject to negotiation, such as the timeframes and things like that were subject to negotiation between the 2 officers, and also involving the other peer review teams. And
if I could just add to that, clearly, from my perspective, this peer review goes to the core of the OAG's business. It's the heart. It's about audit quality and audit performance, and so it's absolutely focused on what matters to the reputation of the OAG and the standing that the chair referred to earlier. And if I could say that not only is Sheila Fraser and the OAG extremely well regarded in Canada, but I can say that extremely well regarded internationally as well. And so I agree with the earlier comments about it just demonstrates the constructive attitude and approach of the OAG to seek this peer review and to have it focused on the essential core business of the office.
Thank you for those comments. My next question is for our Auditor General. Madam Fraser, you requested this particular audit to take place. Can you share with us why you decided to do that?
Thank you, Chair. In the past, we have had 2 peer reviews done. One was completed in 1999-2000 on our financial audit practice, and the other one in 2004 on the performance audit practice. And I thought it important that we have a peer review of all of our practices, not specific practices. I also wanted to have the peer review done before the end of my term. I thought it was important for a new Auditor General to come in, that Auditor General not have the responsibility of conducting a peer review right away. The issues are known now that we have to deal with, and hopefully that Auditor General, before the end of his or her term, will also do a similar peer review to assess the state of affairs of the office. So, yeah, to me it was very important that we do this, and especially in a time with a lot of change going on in the office, it was important to us to have that independent, objective assessment of where we needed to improve and how we could make our practice better.
Okay, thank you. Can you share with us the progress that has been made with regards to the recommendations, if you've had time, in fact, to make some progress?
Yes, we have. We have provided, I believe, to the committee an update of our action plan. You will see that there are several actions which have been completed, the ones that were actually relatively easy to put into place. The major response to the recommendations is this revised audit methodology project that we are undertaking, which we plan to have completed by December of next year. We are on track. We're making good progress. And in the practice areas where we do need that methodology and guidance sooner, for example, in the financial attest practice, it has to be in place for financial statements that we will be undertaking during this next year. We have made very good progress. Staff is being trained. There is methodology that's available to them. So we are progressing well, and we would certainly be pleased, to provide the committee with regular updates on how that is going.
Okay, thank you. Can you share with us how the Executive Committee is going to be monitoring the progress made on these recommendations?
We have asked for regular updates. We have an update of the RAM project we have an update of that every month at the Executive in terms of schedule, costs, resources, and then we have asked for an update of the whole report and action plan, I think semi-annually, just to make sure that we're on track. And this, responsibilities have been assigned, and people will be accountable to delivering on the plan.
Okay. And finally, can you share with us who makes up the Executive Committee?
The Executive Committee is composed of myself, the Deputy Auditor General, the Commissioner of the Environment, and all Assistant Auditors General. So we are now 14 people, I think. The numbers sort of, I think we're 14.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
And that concludes, colleagues, the first round of 7 minutes each. Now we're going to go to the second round, 5 minutes, and we're going to start with Mr. Lee. Mr. Lee, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and my thanks as well to the Australian team for assisting with this peer review. I want to address with our Auditor General here the question of the risk assessment with the focus on fraud, because I always thought audits were intended to uncover the fraud rather than speculating in advance, and it's almost an un-Canadian, maybe it's culture creeping into a financial management system, an un-Canadian thing to start off assuming the worst about a financial system. If a Canadian was walking through the door, there's 2 people at the door, Mother Teresa and a career criminal, the Canadian probably treat them both the same. Whereas one's likely to steal your wallet and the other one's likely to give you a very memorable greeting. So how can you, it's almost unconstitutional to start off assuming or saying how many crooks and cheaters we're going to find in this particular financial envelope. I understand how practical and real that is, but how do you systemically insert that into your meeting agenda as you scope out what you're going to do?
I would start by saying that the risk is not only the risk of fraud, it's also the risk of error. And it's really an assessment of how good are the management controls in place to ensure that the financial reporting is as accurate as possible. So we would look in, certain systems and basically say what could go wrong, either deliberate or accidental, and then what controls are in place to either prevent or detect if something has happened. And then we would test those controls to see if they are actually functioning as planned. The question of fraud has actually evolved quite a bit over the last, 5 years or so. The auditing profession, we used to have an assumption that management was acting in good faith. And this was, went into an audit with almost that as accepted practice. Since some of the very large scandals in the U.S., I would say, since Enron, basically, that assumption has gone. And so auditors now have a responsibility to not give any bias, if you will, one way or another as to how management will act. And we have to probe senior management about fraud. We have to ask audit committees and boards of directors about fraud. Are they looking at the procedures that are in place? Have there been cases uncovered? What have they done in these cases? So it is a much more extensive audit and investigation than used to be done in the past, though I think every auditor will tell you that an audit will not necessarily uncover fraud, and that is not the main purpose of an audit. But we certainly have to do much more work under standards now than we ever had to in the past. And this has been a change, I think, which has come in largely because of large corporate scandals and events in the U.S. in particular.
That means that the auditor then is like the sheriff coming into town. I mean, because if you're going to signal it in advance, we're not just coming to check your books, but we're looking for the bad guys. Is there a balance there? I mean, or are we still working on this? Obviously, the peer review has identified this as something we could be more consistent on.
It's important to note that we do not presume that fraud has occurred. It is just that it is one of the risks that we now have to investigate and question. It's mainly a lot through discussion with senior management and to see what kinds of controls, monitoring controls and other controls they have in place, and are they sensitive to the possibility and the risk of fraud in their own organization. And so I think our auditors as well have to be a little more sensitive to some of the signs.
You're so
that
polite. Could I just ask our Australian friends, is there something we need that's more brutal, a heavier hammer or a sharper knife here, or have we got the right idea here? From your point of view, measured against other international.
Thank you. If I could just say a couple of things in this area. Auditors have always been expected to have a professional scepticism, what we call, in quotes, professional scepticism. That is, we do look for evidence and support for positions taken or for a set of financial statements to make sure the figures do have integrity. The second thing is, as Sheila has mentioned, particularly with the adoption of the risk-based approach to auditing, where the auditor is forever assessing the risk of material misstatement in a set of financial statements, then clearly fraud and error need to be factored into that consideration, and the auditor quite appropriately needs to assess the risk of fraud and error. And if you look at the auditing standard on the auditor's consideration of fraud in a set of financial statements, it actually says that even if the auditor believes the integrity of the board of the entity that you're doing the audit of is of high standing, you should put that view aside in your consideration of the risks of fraud and consider if this board was up to no good, if I can use that expression, how might they perpetrate fraud in terms of the financial reporting of the state of affairs of that entity. So there's no question, since Enron and other collapses, the audit profession has been on notice about seriously considering the risk of fraud, and hence now there are firm requirements in the standards requiring discussions amongst the audit team about assessing the risk of fraud, the discussions that Sheila mentioned about discussions with the entity management. And it is not to suggest that the organisations are criminals, but it's to try to suggest that the auditor has got this obligation to test the risk of fraud and to put in place procedures designed to make sure when they provide the opinion on the financial statements that there is only a very slight chance of that opinion being incorrect. So it is a global move, this risk standard that Canada applies is the same as the international standard, and so it's a more recent development.
Thank you.
5 minutes.
And certainly as well, welcome to Mr. McPhee and his team, and to our Auditor General and the staff. Maybe just a few quick questions. First, to the Auditor General. Have you previously, at any occasion, either worked with Mr. McPhee and his team?
Not formally on a project. We are, of course, colleagues in international fora, but no, we have not worked together. I mean, I know some of his staff has worked with us, for example, on the GAO peer review. We worked together, but beyond that, no.
Oh, thank you very kindly. Now, I can recall a while back when you were here, you intimated that you knew that there were a couple areas where you would, it wasn't necessarily problematic, but there were improvements that could be made. You brought that up to this committee. I'm just wondering, with the peer review audit now, what component of that peer review would reflect these same concerns, and did you really anticipate these outcomes as presented by Mr. McPhee's team, or were they in addition to or corollary?
As the committee may be aware, we do our own internal practice reviews each year. We do a very large number, probably somewhere between 15 and 20 audits that we review ourselves. And the recommendations that come out of the peer review were not a surprise. The issues that were raised were very similar to the same issues that we have found in our most recent peer review, in our most recent practice reviews. So we knew that we had work to do in this area. I think I had mentioned to the committee that I was hoping there wouldn't be any other surprises, and there weren't. We were quite aware that we had to do work in these areas.
Okay, so obviously you've identified this, so you presented a plan of action to follow, but I'm wondering, of course, were you able to discern that you had some areas along the way, and so would you have went to a certain extent before you said, oh, we better take some action on this, or would there just be a gradual improvement or a gradual acknowledgement of a couple of areas of weakness, and would they be fixed right on the spot?
There were several areas. I think our practice reviews, the results came out in about February or March, so spring. Just slightly before, we were aware of the results of some of those practice reviews. We knew we had issues, and some had even been raised in the year before. So issues like documentation is sort of unfortunately kind of a common theme that comes up in most practice reviews and peer reviews. So we had started to encourage the teams to better document. We have made changes to some of our tools where we saw that there were misunderstandings, or we could guide people more in how they should be documenting. So there were a number of actions, and that's why you'll see in the update that many of the actions are actually complete, because we had started in the springtime, and the peer review sort of confirmed to us the necessity to go ahead and put these actions into place. Of course, the largest project is this whole methodology project, which will come over 2 years.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. McPhee, please. You've obviously made two recommendations primarily, but as you said, your report also included just a number of suggestions for the Auditor General to consider. I'm wondering, for the record here, reading in, I'm wondering, could you just elaborate a bit more on what these suggestions you made for the Auditor General to consider?
Thank you very much. Well, I'll just make some opening comments, and I'll ask my colleagues to assist on the detail. But certainly, just to reinforce, the suggestions were areas where we felt, at the margin, improvements could be made, and it drew together the experience of the international team, and as I say, it reflects our normal, certainly in Australia here, our normal approach to reporting, to sort of leave the recommendations to the most significant matters and the suggestions to the report itself. So I'll ask my colleague Brandon just to cover off quickly the various areas that we thought could be improved.
Thanks very much, and it's nice to be here today. The first one I'll talk about is reporting to management. One of the suggestions that we have here is that the OAG could consider ranking the findings that it gets from its annual audit work into a risk tier where things are rated into high, medium and low risk, and in that way they could help consistency of judgments and also inform the people who get the report as to what requires the most attention from them in responding to those issues. That is put as a suggestion because there's some upside and there's some downside with that. It provides, as I said, an opportunity for consistency of judgment and clarity in reporting, but it also causes, in some cases, a distraction in terms of the reporting processes with the entity that's being audited.
If I could add to Brandon's comments, when that system first came in our office, I was sceptical, like a good auditor, about whether it would be beneficial or not. But I decided to continue the approach, and actually, it's been remarkable the effectiveness of it, because a lot of the agency heads who I deal with on a day-to-day basis are very acute and alert to our categorisation of system. So we use A, B and C for our system, and A is the very significant matters that need attention quickly. B is moderate matters, but still important enough to require the CEO's attention, and C are minor and procedural. And so agency heads in this town do not like the thought of their agency being given reported on whether they have these higher level A or B findings, and so they are very focused on eliminating them, because they see it as a bit of a matter amongst their peers that they should be seen to be running a high integrity, well-controlled organisation. And their shorthand assessment of that is the number of A's and B's that the Audit Office provides in its ranking. So it's actually had a much more powerful effect here in Australia than I envisaged in the first place. And so we use it, find it effective, and that's the reason we've just raised it for the OAG to consider.
The next one is in relation to the use of electronic audit working papers. One of the challenges all audit practices face in the preparation and use of basically electronic systems is the timely review of working papers, and also the consistency of its use. We've suggested to the OAG that all reviews should be done within the system so that it's self-contained, is a complete record and can be archived as a complete record. In relation to, I'll get Deb Jackson to talk about the other two ones that relate more to her area of expertise than mine.
Thank you. I'll try and be brief. Basically, the first suggestion for improvement was around continuous improvement. We recognise that the OAG does actually capture lessons learned from both their audits and also stakeholder feedback and practice reviews in several different ways, but we found that they weren't necessarily a systemic approach to capturing those lessons learned and ensuring that they're actually fed back into learning and development programs and things like their RAM project, for example. They have, in their action plan, mentioned they are addressing that and going to put in place a more systematic approach. The other area was in relation to performance audit and special examination reports. The footnotes, of course, we've touched on. The other is just providing a little bit more context in performance audit and special examination reports, and also a little bit, particularly in special examination reports, making it a bit more clearer what they're addressing in those reports, what systems and practices are being examined, and what those findings and conclusions subsequently mean, and what and putting context around for the reader to understand those recommendations. So it's sort of readability of those reports at the end of the day.
Okay, thank you very much. We're going to now move to Madame Fay. Madame Fay is 5 minutes.
Merci, je vais partager.
I'll share my time with Mr. Nadeau. I'll go first. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. We mentioned the issue of the risk of fraud, and we went over the topic, and we explained, and now we're talking about insufficient documentation. What is the situation now after the recommendations? We have emphasized to the relevant personnel the importance of documenting their decisions carefully. The internal practice report shows that there has been an improvement, but I must say that this will always be a challenge because people don't always take the time to document why, what they did, what is the reasoning, what are the conclusions. And that's why we must always remind people to take the time to carefully document their decisions, and with the new international standards, even more documentation is required to explain why certain things were done. But the fact that we had this anomalous situation is just based on the fact that the task takes a great deal of time. We have to go over to the next step, and we want to get right to the heart of the work. We'll neglect this. Is it a question of time or lack of personnel, or is it a cultural issue? In part, it could be a time issue. People are often in a hurry to finish there and under pressure to finish their files. It's also human nature. We do our work, and it's clear to us what we did, but someone else who comes in and looks at what we're doing doesn't necessarily clearly see the reasoning behind the work someone else is doing. And that's why it's necessary to use documents. They don't document the reasoning sufficiently for why they made this or that choice. And the electronic storage of working documents, this is something new. I know that this has been going on for some time, but we have to really question that aspect? I know the technology is changing very fast. Does all that have any kind of relevance? And could it be that through technology, we used to have a certain way of conserving electronic documents, and now it's out of date. We don't even know if we're going to be able to find the machines to be able to read what has been done before. It is, above all, an issue of using computer tools for management audits and performance audits. And we've been using electronic tools for several decades that were used for performance audits, and for management audits, we had to adopt our own tools, which were not necessarily as user-friendly as they could have been, and we've made other changes, and now everyone must apply the policy of using electronic tools, and it's being done. I think that once again this is a question of human nature, and I've been in this practice for a very long time. We're much more used to going through paper pages and hard copy than going into a computer. But I think that our practices are evolving, and that we're going to watch this internally to make sure that files be on the electronic support and as little paper as possible. Well, there's a new support, not necessarily a new way of going about things, but doesn't this bring us to a situation where all the electronic hardware at a periodic, on a periodic basis, maybe 3 or 5 years, we could have a cycle that would help us to make sure that with the new technology, we will not always be a step behind what should be. Certainly, we're using software that is used internationally, that's well recognized for auditing, and there are constant upgrades. You can upgrade your application on a daily basis if you want, and there are conferences in which we participate with legislative bureaus and offices in North America, and it's always a question that arises: is it really worth making the changes to go to the last version, or should we wait and make the jump later? And we are aware of the change, and the big change, of course, that we had to bring about was to incorporate into this software all the standards and all the procedures that we must apply. And with the change of standards, a great deal of work was done to update all this and make life as easy as possible for auditors. Thank you.
Mr. Shipley. Mr. Shipley, 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. McPhee, for being a part of this great day in Canada as we do a peer review or review the report on your peer review. I'd say to the Auditor General, it reads very much like many of the reports that come forward that you do for, and I have to say to the Auditor General and the peer review team, we're very fortunate in Canada from our perspective here, that we have many ministries, agencies, departments, crown corporations that actually come with very good reports. And it always, I guess it is always, because we're human, there are always a few things to make us better. And that gets driven in the large part by a very strong and successful Auditor General's office that we have here. And so I want to congratulate you, sir, for chairing the peer review. And so with that, I would ask the first question to you, Mr. McPhee, in terms of defining the peer review. It has taken my understanding under international guidelines and practices around the world. Are all the countries that, and just for information's sake, the countries that have been involved in the peer review, there's 4 or 5 of you, could you tell us a little bit about their implementation in terms of the standards required by the countries and where they are in terms of the implementation of these practices and standards?
Well, firstly, thank you for your kind comments about the review and the review team. Secondly, the countries that we were involved with in undertaking the review are all members the International Organisation of Supreme Audit Institutions, which are collectively moving to adopt international auditing standards. But I have to say, not all of those audit officers are yet to fully adopt the standards. In terms of the countries we work with, I believe that they are on adopting the auditing standards themselves, but I couldn't give you that entire assurance. So what I can tell you is certainly Australia has adopted the same sort of standards that Canada has, and there's no doubt these are standards that today are produced by the International Auditing and Assurance Standards Board to have application in both the private sector and equally in the public sector. And that's very important. So the standards that we are using in our audits, that Canada is using and we in Australia are using, are right up there in terms of high quality standards. And the other thing that's important to say is all audit officers do have issues about reinforcing the importance of training and adherence to the standards. And in particular, I would reinforce what Sheila Fraser mentioned about documentation. It is an issue that features in many reviews of many audit practices, both in the private sector and in the public sector. So what I can tell you is not all audit officers around the world adopt international auditing standards at this time, but certainly the leading audit officers do. Australia and Canada do. And I would say with some confidence, but without the evidence, that our colleagues on the peer review would be in a similar position to Australia.
My question is to the Auditor General, and it comes from a comment made by Mr. Jarrett regarding the reporting to management, which basically is the issue of senior management involvement. I read in your report that is something that has been completed in 2010, I believe. I'm just wondering, it would seem to me that, and if I'm missing something, please tell me, it would just seem to me that that would have been, when I'm very much of a management practice, that should have been in place. When we have other agencies, often I remember back about the management control, the communication gaps, how we're going to make and infiltrate into our technology and all the communication strategies that we have. I'm just wondering, I'm pleased to see that it's completed. I'm just wondering why it's now and not sooner.
Yes, this refers to senior management of the office and their involvement in the audits. Moving to the risk-based approach to audit requires more senior management involvement than may have been the case in the past. And in particular, the involvement of our Assistant Auditors General. We had, I think, perhaps placed too much reliance on other members of our management category. We have 3 levels in that management category, so the principals and the directors were really viewed as being the ones who led the audits, and we've now clarified that the Assistant Auditors General really need to be involved, certainly for the higher risk audits, and they have to be involved in the determination of which ones are higher risk. They need to be involved right up front in the planning, in ensuring that the risks are properly identified and that the audit procedures being planned will adequately address those risks. So it's putting an additional, I think, some did it very well, others less well. It was really a question of clarifying the expectation that they should be involved. And again, our internal practice reviews, this is an area that we will be looking at to make sure that it is happening as expected.
Thank you, Mr. McPhee and the Auditor General.
Shipley, now we're going to go Mr. Christopherson, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. McPhee, I was just curious, were there any practices that you saw here in Canada in our Auditor General shop that you'd look at incorporating in Australia?
Well, thank you, Vice Chair. Yes, there certainly were, and we actually make reference to some of these in the report on page 17 of the English version. Certainly, we think the way that your committee and the Auditor General work together is a very high level model, and we are most interested in the strong and active relationship between the OAG and your committee. So we have observed that already. We like the clarity of the messages in the OAG reports. I think one of the challenges we auditors do have from time to time is we perhaps use language that some others don't always understand. So clarity of message, clarity of communication is important, and we think the reports that the OAG do are very good from that point of view. So we've taken on board that particular approach. Some of the collaborative audits that the OAG do with other organisations, we found that very interesting, and we in Australia have not worked collaboratively with other organisations in undertaking audits, but we do produce what we call here better practice guides, which basically seek to draw from the information we learn from audits to articulate what is better practice, be it in grants, administration, or contingency planning, or even how to prepare a set of financial statements. We have a series of better practice guides, and in some cases we work collaboratively with other agencies to produce those better practice guides, and so we're interested in those matters. And I think the last one was the area of the criteria for special examinations, and we're interested in that. So I think it's like any other area of activity, we learn so much from international experience from here in Australia, that is speaking, and Canada is, as has been mentioned by various committee members, the OAG is a great asset for your country, and it's highly regarded, and we learn a lot by just being in touch with the OAG, and in this case the whole review team flagged these 4 or 5 areas where we could learn. But we, as Sheila Fraser mentioned, we do meet at international gatherings, we do contribute and learn from each other and share experiences. And I, for instance, without taking much of the committee's time, I'm very focused on audit quality, trying forever to improve the quality of the products we produce, particularly the reports we produce. And we have to do it in a fairly efficient manner because of resource considerations, but we are working very hard to, particularly in our performance audits, to invest in quality in the early stage of the audits so that we're all aligned, and so when it comes to producing the final report, we've got a clear understanding of what the messages are likely to be, and we're comfortable with how they're being produced. So I think every audit office is interested in improving the quality of its work, and I think the positive thing from the point of view of the OAG is the investment the office has in the quality management systems is a very good basis for producing quality work. And the OAG faces the same issues that other audit offices do. It's about how to make sure the implementation of audits actually follows the management systems and the policies and the procedures that the OAG has articulated. And the other final comment I'd make while I'm speaking is there's no doubt that auditing these days does require a higher level of involvement. The risk-based approach does require mature consideration of risks to misreporting or to misperformance, and it does require a high level of senior management involvement, particularly in the planning and the reporting phases and the review phases. And so it's gone from being, in the old days, they used to, send people out with lists of things to tick and flick, as we used to say, and check things off. And young auditors would be doing things that they never understood exactly why they were doing it, but the senior had told them to go and do that, and that's what you did, and you reported back. Whereas what we're trying to do now is to make sure the whole audit team understands the risk-based, the risks that this that there aren't misreporting, and to make sure the audit covers off those risks. And so it requires a very thinking approach, a very intellectual approach today. And so I fully endorse what Sheila was saying about the importance of having more senior involvement in our audit teams, particularly in key stages. Thank you, Vice Chair.
Sorry? Brief cut? Okay, good. Thank you very much. Then I'll take an opportunity just for a clarification, really. It came up in an earlier question on page 3 of your spreadsheet. There was a recommendation. I won't get into it because I think I just need a quick clarification. You agreed with it, and you said, I quote, "Our own internal practice reviews have also identified the need for improvements in our audit documentation. The office's executive committee will take the necessary steps." And my question was going to be, if you'd already identified it in your own audit, why did you wait till this audit identified it to take steps? But I believe in an answer from either question from Mr. Cramp or Mr. Saxton that you mentioned that you were already on it, and that probably should read that you've already started the steps and you'll continue. So am I correct in that clarification? Very good. Thank you very much. And Mr. McPhee, thank you again very much, just on behalf of the Canadian people and certainly the people I represent. Thank you for your efforts. We do take accountability, like you do in Australia, very, very seriously. It's at the core of our democracy, and this office has to work. We're not always going to have the benefit of Sheila Fraser to be here, so if we can leave this office as strong as possible going into that transition, it's such a help to us in our democratic system. So thank you again, and thank the people of Australia for offering you up to do these services.
Thank you, Mr. Christopherson.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Christopherson. Mr. Young, 5 minutes.
Chair, and I reiterate that thanks as well, Mr. McPhee. I wanted to ask you about your second recommendation to the Auditor General of Canada, which is referring to reinforce the staff the need for documentation on electronic working papers. And it sounds pretty serious, and I'm trying to get a handle on how serious it is. There's reference to examples where the electronic working papers didn't contain sufficient documentation. There's reference to documentation gaps. On occasion, the report clearance summary was subject to revision, and unadjusted errors found were not adequately collated, documented, or reported. So I'm still trying to get up to speed on Auditor General jargon, Auditor General speak. But I've been on this committee for a year now, and what we ultimately get is a parade of ministry staff who come before us with a giant mea culpa, and they say, we agree with the Auditor General, and we thank the Auditor General, and we've already begun to fix these problems. It's like no one will ever challenge the Auditor General and say, you've reached an incorrect conclusion, or we think you're wrong on this, at least not publicly. We don't get it in front of this committee. So I'm trying to get an understanding. There's no evidence that there were any errors or omissions, or that there was misconclusions or missed opportunities. So is your report saying that it's possible because of these problems, or that you think it was likely that it happened?
No, we're just suggesting that the documentation could have been better put together to address the audit risks, and as Sheila Fraser mentioned earlier, the alignment between the risks and then the audit procedures put in place to assess whether those risks were significant or not, and whether there could be any misreporting as a result of some of those matters. So, and I'll ask Brandon Jarrett, my colleague, to just go into some of the details, so you perhaps have a bit more hands-on experience here to help you understand the particular point.
Thank you. I suppose, simply put, the audit file needs to be able to show what you intended to do, what you did, and support all the judgments on the way through. And as we've talked about before, that's a challenge across the profession internationally. In some cases, in looking at the files, we couldn't see a clear path between things that were planned to be done or were done, but that doesn't mean that the judgments at the end of the day were incorrect. What that means is that in terms of reviewing the file, I couldn't see a clear process or clear documentation to be able to support everything that needed to be done in accordance with the auditing standards.
Thank you very much. That's very helpful. And another question for Mr. McPhee, please, that you had reported that one of the best practices of our Auditor General was with regards to special examinations, which are very important. And you talked about sharing information and that you may have adopted some of the methods that are used here in Australia. Oh, I want to ask you about the other side of the coin. Is there anything that you wanted to suggest here or have suggested that your department does that we should be doing more with regards to special examinations? In other words, is there an international best practice that you have achieved or are working towards?
Certainly, I wouldn't claim that we've got to the international best practice, but we do work hard, as I said earlier, about improving the audit quality. And I'll ask just Deb Jackson whether there's any specific matters in relation to special examinations that we may be able to draw on.
Thank you. I suppose one point we probably need to make first is the ANAO, or most of the audit officers don't really do. The special examinations is a slightly different product to most of the audit officers actually do. We do performance audits of equivalent type of bodies as the special examinations are, but we don't actually do special examinations per se. The recognition of the good practice that we did here was that they had actually developed criteria and sub-criteria that could be used across several of the practices, and that's why we recognised that that was actually good practice, and we feel that it was also adaptable to performance audit. There's probably anything further. There's probably no other further sort of good practices that we felt we could include in the report. We were trying to focus on some high-level things. There's probably some minor things about some of the practices in both performance audit and special examinations that we can adopt, which Mr. McPhee has actually mentioned before, but certainly that one that we've mentioned here, which was development of criteria and sub-criteria for examining systems and practices, is a good practice.
And if I could just add to what Deb said, we've recently implementing some software which allows our audit teams to interrogate our past audit reports and draw, for instance, out criteria which may have been used in the past, or where we've articulated something around a subject matter like risk management or governance. They can quickly search the material to access it to improve the efficiency of their current audit. And in a similar vein, we touched earlier on tables and the presentation of statistical information. Again, we've got some software which helps us enormously, and we're working with our Bureau of Statistics to present information in a much better way. We are trying in our audit analysis to use more software to help us analyse the population of data that we're looking at. And so as a result of that, we're being able to draw information out, and there's a real art form in terms of how to best present information in a statistical sense. So we are again working on a software solution to allow our teams to put into our reports diagrams, graphs, pie charts, that sort of thing, to try and get away or try and assist the communication of the messages in our reports. And it's very much a journey, this focus on audit quality and communication. And in talking to the US GAO, I was asking them about, particularly recently, about communication, because I'm conscious of the way we auditors present reports sometimes lacks the clarity that some members of Parliament would like to see. And it was interesting that they said that they are introducing communication specialists into their audit teams from the very early planning stages right through to the end of the process to make sure that the audit team continues to focus on the clarity of the findings and the conclusions and the messaging as a result of their work. And I find it here with my own staff sometimes that, it's not surprising they get very close to the detail of their work. And often I'll say, well, you just need to stand back. What's the key message here? What's the primary message we want to get across? And so we're working hard like the OAG, but just to improve the quality of our work and to pick up best practice from anywhere in the world we can get it. But the reality is we tend to pick it up from the leading countries, of which OAG is one. But we're all ears when it comes to improving our own performance.
Thank you.
Young, I believe Ms. Fraser has a comment to make on that
Mr.
point.
Chair, I just wanted to make the point that special examinations are unique to the federal Crown corporations. To my knowledge, no other legislative audit office does special examinations per se of Crown corporations. They will do performance audits, so there is a lot of similarity, but special exams are very unique, as I said, to the federal government. Yeah.
Perhaps to clarify, Mr. McPhee, if I could ask you a question, could you describe the differences between the way that the Australian National Audit Office operates and the way that the Canadian Office of the Auditor General Office operates? Basically, we all know how the Canadian system operates. We have a number of probably between 25 to 30 performance audits tabled in Parliament every year. We do have the departmental and the consolidated financial audits, and of course we have the special examinations of selected Crown corporations and agencies. Does that significantly differ from the Australian experience?
I don't think it's significantly different. Let me just give you an outline of our mandate and what that entails. We do all of the financial statement audits of Commonwealth or Australian government-controlled entities, and altogether there's about 243 entities. We do, in Australia, departments of state. Departments are required to produce financial statements, and they in turn are consolidated into the government's own accounts along with all of the transactions of all of the other government-controlled entities. I think that may be a difference to Canada, where our departments are required to have individual reports in the first place, and we're required to audit them. So on the financial statement side, that's our remit. On the performance audits, we do about 50 performance audits a year. That is the other thing is perhaps an important difference. I can table reports whether Parliament is sitting or not. I can table reports all through the year. So we produce reports, individual performance audit reports on a program or topic, and so I can table those, and we produce 50 odd a year. They're about 100 pages long, and they cost us about up to $500,000 in round figures each one, and we have a very broad performance audit mandate. But the only thing is, at the moment, I am not able to undertake a performance audit of a government business enterprise. I've raised with my own Public Accounts Committee whether that should be changed, whether that constraint should continue to be in our legislation. But with that aside, because we have less and less government business enterprises across the years, Australian governments have tended to sell off many of the commercial entities that formerly were government business enterprises. So it's not such a significant issue as it used to be. But we have a wide performance audit mandate. I think we pretty much go through similar sorts of processes. Some are more sensitive than others. On the sensitive ones, I get heavily involved, including with discussions with the chief executives about the matters being raised. And of course, then we table the reports in very much the same way. And our Public Accounts Committee here in Australia has a statutory obligation to review each of the performance audit reports we produce. And in some cases, they will have an inquiry into the matters. So to that extent, I think there's much more in the way of similarities than differences, Chair.
Just for clarification, Mr. McPhee, do I take it from what you state that all your departments produce audited financial statements on a departmental basis?
Correct.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Drishin, 5 minutes.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you to our guests from Australia, Mr. McPhee, and your officials. I certainly appreciate this opportunity to hear some of your views as we've gone through the peer review of the Office of our Auditor General, and thank you to our auditor and Mr. Wurzman. Certainly appreciate you being here as well. In response to one of Mr. Nadeau's earlier questions, you spoke of how specific changes in accounting practices and standards would require extra training time for the audit teams. And I was just wondering if you have any estimates of how time-consuming these training sessions might be, and perhaps expanding upon that, there was also the discussion of the electronic audit file management. And just wondering whether the software that is coming there and the training process that is associated with that will actually speed up the audit process, and what evidence there might be that you'll be getting value for money.
No, perhaps ask Mr. Oh, sorry.
No. And I would appreciate.
Sorry, Sheila, you go.
and I would appreciate a comment as well, Ms. McPhee. I know that that you had addressed this also.
I'll start, and then Mr. McPhee can add as well. I'll begin. I'll ask Mr. Wurzman as well to help me on the question of electronic working papers. There has been actually quite extensive training already given to staff. I think it's more, and we have what we call a network of super users, people in each one of the groups who are more expert and understand the capabilities. And so they're there to help people as they're doing their audits. Obviously, for the people who aren't very familiar, the first time they go through it is obviously going to be require more time. But we actually just had a staff session today, and one of the people was saying that now he's quite comfortable with it after having doing it 2 or 3 times. And there are advantages to having the electronic files in that you can update some of the permanent information quite easily from year to year. So there can be some efficiencies to gain from that. On the question of training, we've done 2 major programs. One is on international financial reporting standards, which are the new accounting standards coming in, and the other is on the new Canadian auditing standards. And I can perhaps ask Mr. Wurzman to explain that.
Very briefly, Mr. Chairman, on the adoption of new accounting standards, the biggest change there is the adoption of international financial reporting standards, something called IFRS. Many of the larger Crown corporations will be transitioning to those international financial reporting standards. I believe there's around 29 entities that'll be adopting those international standards. And we have set aside in the office a little reserve, if I can call it that, of about 10,000 audit hours to help the teams, to allow the teams to be able to audit their financial statements against those financial reporting standards. Sheila's already talked about the training, both with IFRS and the Canadian auditing standards. I think in total, we're probably, over the course of this year, going to be offering a week or more of training to all staff, including the members of the executive committee. We are going to have a 2-day session on, we've already had some training on accounting standards. We'll have a 2-day session on the adoption of the Canadian auditing standards. On the adoption of and the use of electronic file management, the tool we use there is a tool we call Teammate. I think Sheila earlier alluded to the fact that we've been using that in our financial audit practice for over a decade now. So it's fairly well ingrained in our financial audit practice. It's only more recently been introduced to the other 2 practice lines. The training is offered. We have user sessions, Teammate training sessions, 1 to 2 days to help them make the transition from hard copy paper files to electronic files. All that to say that it's all part of our renewal of an audit methodology project. It is a big project. It's going on for over 2 years, and we're confident we'll be successful and complete the project by the end of next calendar year.
Well, Thank you very much. Now, Mr. McPhee, is this something you have been through this process then already, or do you use this management tool in order, as I think I heard you suggest earlier, that you use that to go back over previous audits to do some checks? Could you perhaps explain how that is working?
Yeah, thank you. Yes, certainly we have similar audit technology. We use Teammate in Australia as well for our financial statement work, and we have electronic record management systems, particularly for our performance auditors. They seem to be able to accumulate reams of information as they go about their work, and so we're now heavily into using technology to improve the efficiency and I think the effectiveness of our audit approach. We in Australia have adopted international financial reporting standards some years ago, and there's significant changes coming through in accounting standards. Certainly in Australia, we've seen a significant move from historical cost accounting to present value accounting, where assets and liabilities are measured at current values, not historical costs, which introduces more volatility into the presentation of information. So we, in some cases, where balances are significant, and just going back to the risk approach, where you've got a significant, say, a liability, say, call it a superannuation liability or an employee benefits liability, where you may need specialist assistance. We now, from time to time, use actuaries on these significant numbers to make sure that we cover off the risk that they are, in fact, not appropriately accounted for in terms of the standards. So we're using more specialists than ever before because of this move to more current value presentation of information. In the public sector, we have a range of specialist assets. So the reporting agencies use valuers in their work, and just from time to time, we may want a valuer of our own to assess the approach adopted by the entity's valuer. So there's some work involved in there. So all that is just to say that the accounting standards are driving a fair volume of work for my office. Add on top of that the auditing standards, which are changing all of the time, and then the underlying audit methodologies and systems that we have in place to support everyone. It means that there is a heavy training impost, probably up to 2 or 3 days a year, certainly on average, and plus quite regular, what we call technical updates to make sure our teams are across issues as they arise, and are fully informed about the various approaches. So it's a very significant cost, but it's not always obvious to outsiders looking in of the investment we make in training necessarily to make sure we can produce quality audits.
And that concludes the second round. We're going to now ask for any closing comments that either Mr. McPhee or Ms. Fraser have. Mr. McPhee, any closing comments to the committee?
Well, firstly, thank you for inviting us to be part of your inquiry, and it was an honour to be asked by the OAG to lead the international review team, and I'm very comfortable with the report that Australia and its international colleagues has produced here. Having said that, the issues that we've raised in this report are not unique to OAG, and it's a message to all audit officers, and including my own, about the importance of making sure we have the training and the follow-through to ensure that the systems we put in place are actually followed so that we can produce quality audits for the information of the Parliament and the country. So thank you very much, Chair and members.
Well, thank you, Mr. McPhee. And Ms. Fraser, any closing comments you want to leave
Thank
with the
you,
committee?
Chair. First of all, I'd like to thank the committee for their interest in this review and in this report. You may be aware there has been a sort of a general agreement in the international audit community that we would conduct these peer reviews and each office would contribute the time. So the office being reviewed only pays out-of-pocket expenses. If we had had to contract this review, it would have been very expensive. So I would very much like to thank Ian and all of his staff for what I hope they view as an investment in improving our practice. I know they've put considerable work, the Australian Audit Office and the other audit offices as well, and I am confident that this report and this review will help us to become even better than we are, and will provide you with the assurance that you can rely on the quality of our work. So my thanks to Ian and his colleagues.
Well, thank you very much, Ms. Fraser. And on behalf of all members of this committee, and in fact all members of Parliament, I want to thank again you, Mr. McPhee, and your colleagues there tonight, Mr. Jarrett, Ms. Jackson, and Mr. Jones, and the entire team, and also to highlight the other people, the professionals from Netherlands, Denmark, Sweden, and Norway that worked on this international peer review. And I want to thank you also for getting up so early in the morning to be part of this meeting. And I think I'd be remiss if I didn't thank the technical staff of the House of Commons. This meeting was done via video conferencing, and it certainly would be done at a fraction of the cost of bringing witnesses from Australia. And it went off without a hitch. So I do want to thank everyone involved in the organization and setup of this meeting. I understand the meeting was televised. I'm sure people found it very boring, and the entertainment value was very minimal. But I do want to point out that this process is vitally important to the operation of Parliament. So I do want to, in closing, thank everyone involved, and I will adjourn the meeting. Thank you. Meeting adjourned.